Hej, moje ime je Teja in to je tvoja dnevna doza vitamina P. Pogovorov o telesu, umu, življenju. Danes sem pred mikrofon povabila Petro Fisher. Ona je movement coach, oziroma lahko bi rekli, da nas uči, kako s pravilnim gibanjem do boljšega počutja in boljšega zdravja. Današnja epizoda je v angleščini, brez podnapisov. Če si kdo želi slovensko, skrajšano obnovo pogovora, se mi lahko oglasi. Več o tem pa spodaj v opisu. Zdaj pa gremo poslušati.
Hello, Petra. I'm so excited that you are here today to talk with me and all the viewers about movement. I've been following you on social media for quite some time now because I myself am very interested in this topic. I am a fitness instructor, but over the years, I realized it's not all about sets and repetitions, and I became more interested in how we are supposed to be moving for our general well-being and health. So I like your view on movement. That's why I decided to invite you to my podcast. But when I was reading more about you, I found it very interesting that you used to work as a lawyer before. And that's quite a transition, from being a lawyer to now being a movement coach. And I'm really interested in why and when did this transition happen?
Yeah, for sure. So thank you very much. I'm really thrilled that you invited me. So thank you. I guess, I'm going to make it a fairly short story. I was a miserable lawyer. I went into law for the wrong reasons. I wanted to make money and have a proper career, and I didn't know what else to do. And it was instantly obvious that it was the wrong choice for me. I just didn't know what else to do. So in sort of a certain way, I was kind of lucky because I kept having all kinds of body problems and chronic injuries. And after many, many, many years of kind of massage therapy and chiropractic and doing different things like that, I finally discovered that there was movement therapy out there. And actually rehab Pilates was my first experience of movement for health. And as soon as I tried it, I was like, oh yeah, this is amazing. This is what I want to do. So by then I had actually transitioned out of law and I was working in public policy in the Ontario government in Canada. But I already knew that I was wanting to transition. So as soon as I discovered movement, I was like, this is amazing. And then my perspective has really been shaped by the fact that my very first certification was actually a personal trainer certification because I just wanted to see if I liked teaching and enjoyed kind of being in the movement world. And I did. And my very first client was somebody who was having a hard time doing a squat without doing some funky stuff with her back. And I was looking online for squatting tips. And I came across Katie Bowman there. And I don't know if you've come across Katie Bowman, but she's an American biomechanist who has worked a lot on kind of expanding the definition of exercise to include all day movement. So, her perspective has been that, when we're trying to work with exercise alone, what we're doing is we're feeding our bodies a very artificial dosage of movement. And we have many other hours in the day where we are not necessarily exercising or moving well, that ultimately kind of adds up to having a bigger impact than those 3 or 4 hours a week that we might be exercising. So I read her blog first about squatting. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I just dived headfirst into everything that she taught. So I got certified with her immediately. And she has mentored me and shaped my perspective on how we can think about movement and how we have just this amazing opportunity in our time outside of the exercise classroom to move more in all kinds of ways. So I think that that's really influenced me a lot.
So how much movement is in your day right now compared to before when you were a lawyer?
Oh my gosh. Oh, so much more. So I've done my best to shape my lifestyle around movement. It doesn't always, I don't think anyone can do all of the things. And it depends a little bit on where I'm at in my life. So as you may know, we travel full time and we've been traveling full time for about 6 years now. And the place that we are at, always shapes the way that we move and our movement opportunities. So right now we are in Central Java in Indonesia. It's tropical, it's humid, it's super hot. We're here to surf, and we surf a lot in the mornings. And the end result is that I'm not walking as much as I would like to be, or I normally would in a different climate. So walking really is one of my movement priorities. And right now it's not happening as much as I would like it to be. So it's interesting how that changes. But in any given day, I try to kind of do a combination of personal practice that is tailored towards resolving issues that I've noticed in my body, because I always have something I want to work on. Some degree of learning if I possibly can. So taking some classes from other movement teachers so that I can expand my movement teaching vocabulary. Something that's hitting kind of the big movement pieces. So walking, usually squatting as a movement pattern, and hanging from the bars, or like climbing a tree, some sort of climbing pattern. I try to have that in every day. Something big picture, we do a lot of surfing, and that sort of is getting some of the cardio that I might be otherwise getting from walking. And then we're trying to add some weightlifting in now too, because I think it's pretty clear that some sort of heavy lifting stuff is pretty essential. So that's kind of the exercise components that I try to work with a little bit, at least every day. And then we also have just our daily life movement. So we don't really use furniture, because that means that we get a lot more opportunities to go up and down from the floor. It doesn't mean I never sit in chairs, but right now I'm standing at our standing workstation, and when possible, I will work or eat at a ground level table. We wear minimal footwear because you get more movement in your feet when you walk in minimal footwear. I take a lot of movement breaks from the computer, which is one of the ways that I kind of get all those exercise pieces in. So we just try to think about how we plan our lives with an eye to filling our days up with movement as much as possible.
And now you already mentioned movement and exercise, and those two are not the same, right? What's the main difference?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a lot of ways to define them, and people define it differently. But the way I think about it is that movement is every single way you move your body all day long. And so that could mean exercising, but it could also mean carrying a baby, or I don't know, squatting to go to the bathroom, or going for a walk or not going for a walk. So it's everything that your body does. And it includes the micro movements. So, one thing that I end up working a lot on is body alignment. So you're going to get a different outcome in your day if you stand with your pelvis forward versus standing with your pelvis vertically aligned over your hips. So there's how you move, as well as kind of what you're doing when you move. So there's a really big picture, is like all the things that you do as your body moves. And I know one good definition of it that I think works quite well is that movement is what you do when you are getting your life done. So how do you move when you get your groceries, or how do you move when you tend your garden, versus exercise is movement that you do to get a benefit out of the movement. So I'm exercising because I want to get a big booty, or because I want to lose weight, or whatever reason you might exercise for.
Okay, so besides the big booty, I think both are necessary, I'm guessing, right? I mean, if you only include exercise in your life like twice a week, that's not enough, right? Mm-hmm. You have to incorporate more and more of, yes, everyday movement, and think about that movement, because we are not used to that.
Yeah, we're not used to it at all.
Yeah, that's a shift that has to
happen. A cultural thing, right?
Yes,
totally. It's a shift. And once you see it, you're like, oh, you can't unsee it anymore. Because if you think, I think that it doesn't always work to look at an evolutionary model of how humans would have moved as we were evolving. But I think in terms of our body, so, one thing that people I don't think fully understand is what movement does in our body that's not about having a big booty or losing weight. Like, there is so many. Every single body system requires movement in some way. So for example, your digestion works better if your core is in alignment and if you twist and move your core all the time, because those movements affect how you move food through your gut, or your circulation, in your fingers and toes is affected not just by going for a run, but by walking on texture or holding textured surfaces, because there's these micro movements. So it's whether, there's this bigger picture to your cardiovascular health. There's this bigger picture to your digestive health. There's this bigger picture to, even your muscles. We all know muscle mass is great from the point of view of, stability and not having painful joints, but it's also good from the point of view of your immune system, So there are so many systems that you never think about that depend upon movement. And what we've done is we've got this culture that has separated human movement from human doing everything else. And we, are all at some level connected to our computers and our phones. So there's this huge gap between what your average hunter-gatherer would have done and what you as a modern human would do in your day. So I think it's about trying to fill that gap in. I don't think you necessarily must have exercise, but if you're a modern human, you probably do need to have exercise, because you're not a hunter-gatherer, and you're not, and there are still some living hunter-gatherer tribes, and there's been really interesting studies done on, their cardiovascular health and their, energy expenditure over a day. And it's not really that they go and work out a whole ton, because they don't. They go and track a giraffe, or they squat around a fire. Like, there's a lot of all-day movement they do. So the more that, and it's a lot of low-level movement too. It's not a ton of like super intense stuff, although more than most of us get. So exercise is almost like it's the multivitamin. It's I've got, this fake nutritional supplement that I can give myself that works really well, but it may not be the whole picture, in the same way that, eating a plate of green vegetables is different for your body than drinking some athletic greens is for your body. So which one, you do what you can, but you probably want to kind of inch that over to more vegetables and less athletic greens over time.
That's so good that now you mentioned that, because I didn't want to talk about nutrition because we are talking about movement, but I was wondering, because I never heard you talk about nutrition, but you must think something about it. What do you think it's more important, movement or nutrition?
So I need to start like very clearly. I am in no way trained to talk about nutrition, which is why I don't talk about it. I'm really careful not to really speak about it. I think two things about nutrition. Number one is that the stuff you get from your food, like the nutrients you get from your food, the way those nutrients get into your cells is from movement. You are missing feeding out on cells unless you move all your parts. So, they're both important, but that movement piece is really vital. You're not going to get strong bones. You're not going to get calcium into your bones unless you're moving and recreating bone density. You're not getting fluid into your joints unless you're moving your joints. So, you can't get nutrition unless the nutrients are in your blood, but those nutrients aren't getting into your cells unless you're moving. The other really interesting thing about nutrition is that, as far as I can tell, we don't understand very much about it. Most of the studies are really challenging, and I don't know if you've come across Dr. Peter Fisher, who is an American doctor who's doing a lot of work right now on longevity. And he's interesting because he looks at the research with a very critical eye about kind of what you should and shouldn't be understanding from the research that's out there. So he's quite worth reading. And it's fascinating because it's very hard to study nutrition because it's so complex and people report it poorly a lot of the time. And there's a real possibility that your body and my body react to different foods in different ways. So I think that there are similar problems in studying exercise, but it's very clear from all the research that movement and exercise is really important and probably has the biggest impact across the board on kind of your general health and longevity. So I'm going to put my vote in here for movement, but I like eating too.
Okay, great. Check. Okay. So back to movement. I know that you are also a huge advocate for barefoot walking. And you kind of touched on that before, but let's go over it again. Why do you think that's so important?
For sure. So in my teaching, I really try to at least start people with heavy hitting changes, with changes that have a big impact. And that can mean well, I mean, basically, you know, like a relatively little effort for relatively big impact. And when it comes to our feet, we have this kind of double win situation because our feet are really important to how we move because they connect us to our ground. How our feet are or are not moving will affect everything from our knees to our hips to our pelvic floor to our back to our neck. Like there's just a huge impact from how your feet are moving. And on top of that, our feet are very mistreated with conventional footwear. So our typical shoes will squash our feet, which causes the muscles not to work very well, which means we lose the patterning that our feet give to our bodies. They push our bodies forward in space, like the heels. They stiffen our feet because we're so cushioned. And so they have this really big impact on our feet. So we grow up with these kind of poorly formed, weak, stiff feet. And that has a whole body impact, which means that I think for almost everybody, if you were just going to change one thing, then transitioning to more foot-friendly footwear would be a really, really good thing to do. So I'm not necessarily like everybody should be barefoot. I personally am often barefoot, but I'm also in tropical countries right now. I know that doesn't work for everybody. But what's really nice right now is that, you know, you can find healthier shoes that will nourish better foot health and better movement for every foot. So if you had a very stiff arthritic foot, you could still find a shoe that had cushion, but also still had a big toe box and didn't have a heel. And that's right there going to do better for your body than you would in a conventional orthotic footwear. Whereas if you're somebody who wants to put the time into adapting and who has kind of a healthy foot to start with, then you might do really well in a very barefoot-like shoe. So, you know, you can do some work to adjust to the shoes, which I think is important as well, but you can get a huge benefit from changing your footwear and looking after your feet that has so much more impact on everything that, you know, your feet, yeah, but also everything above your feet.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because people are not connecting the dots. They are only thinking, you know, when you mention barefoot walking or barefoot shoes, they're only thinking about feet. Yeah. But it's really all connected. Yeah.
It's huge. It's huge.
The one thing or the first thing that really pulled me into your work were your cars. Not the ones on four wheels, but cars as in controlled articular rotations. I had to read this.
You nailed it.
Yay. So could you please explain in short what are C.A.R.S?
Yeah, for sure. So just like the feet and footwear thing, C.A.R.S are one of those really heavy hitting movement choices that I think many, many people can benefit from. C.A.R.S are indeed a controlled articular rotation. So really that means it's a controlled joint circle and you do them. It's a daily joint care practice where you move all of your joints through their complete range of motion a couple of times in both directions. So it's very simple at its heart. But the reason that's so great is A, because it's simple, which means you can do it. And B, what it starts to do is it starts to be a really effective multivitamin for that hunter-gatherer movement pattern that you're missing. Because if you were that hunter-gatherer person, you'd be squatting, you'd be climbing, you'd be carrying, you'd be moving in all these directions, which you don't get in your I'm at a computer kind of a day. So your C.A.R.S give you this fast and easy 10 to 15 minute routine where you're getting a ton of full range movement in all of your joints. And what that does for your joints is it preserves the mobility that you have. It increases your body awareness because your joints have special nerve endings that kind of directly connect with your brain. So you're giving your brain a lot of feedback when you move through your joints. It feeds and waters your joints. So that same kind of, you've got to move your joint to feed your joint, and which also decreases inflammation around your joints. It strengthens your joint tissues. Most people instantly feel, well, within like a week or two of doing them, they'll feel more smooth and controlled and fluid when they move, less aches and pains. So you get this kind of sensation difference. So they're just an incredible package. And I think maybe even my favorite part about it is that they're also part of building a movement vocabulary. They're an isolated movement. And most of us work quite well in compound movements where we're, you know, reaching for things or jumping up and down. But most of us also really struggle to isolate. And it's not that you should ever move in isolation in real life, but you're a complex system and you're made out of many, many, many pieces. And if 4 of those pieces aren't working very well, your whole system isn't going to work very well. And so what C.A.R.S give you is this insight into which pieces are and are not working well because they isolate. And then once you've got this vocabulary of knowing how to move your elbow or knowing how to move your shoulder, you can build on that into more complex movements, more loaded movements, progressive mobility work. So they're an excellent way to build that awareness, that capacity, and that kind of foundation for moving on with.
Yeah, I think there are basics for everything that's supposed to come later. I mean, we should start at the beginning, but we often just skip a few steps or don't even
well,
think
our culture's telling you to. Totally. Yeah. If you go to Instagram, everybody's doing all these backflips. And it's like, like I like backflips too, but it's not a good place for most people to start. And it looks great, but it leads to a lot of injuries. And then, I work a lot with an older population and people who have already got sore knees or frozen shoulder. And, you need to have exercises that are very scalable. And we're not taught how to scale exercises. Now, you probably know because you're a movement teacher, how to make exercises work for people. But when you're a person who's grown up in, I think Western culture, you've maybe been introduced to sports through your gym classes at school. You've maybe gone to a yoga class and, you're going to see things on Instagram and you're going to be like, I could never do that. And that's not really true. You probably could do that, but you'd have to back it up and build it up and progress. So that's the piece missing in so much teaching, I think.
Yes. And there are many consequences of today's lifestyle. And I think that lower back pain is very common. And what would you say to somebody that has lower back pain? What to do first?
Well, first, don't panic. It is very common. Most lower back pain resolves by itself. My next thing would be don't do surgery unless you've absolutely tried all the other things, because it has a really, really terrible failure rate, and it can be very painful. So there's usually better solutions for back pain than surgery. After that, it's a little bit of a wide open question. So I think it's really important, and I'm sure, again, you probably know about this, but your listeners may not be aware of the fact that what pain science, the science of studying what pain is in the body, what that's saying these days is that what you feel in terms of pain may have very little to do with damage. It might be because of damage, but it might be that you have no damage and you have some pain. And that means that when you're addressing pain, you don't want to think only about movement. You want to think about the bigger picture. So how are you sleeping? How are you eating? What's your stress level like? Those are big with pain, because pain is kind of this alarm signal in your body. So anything that's causing your body alarm can contribute to pain. So that's number one. Number two is, yes, explore movement. And there's so many different movement things that can potentially affect back pain. So I'd be looking at what's your spinal mobility like, what's your hip mobility like, what's your shoulder mobility like, because limitations in any of those areas will tend to show up in terms of how your back is moving. So I like to work on function, because changing function often changes feeling. I also believe that how our bodies are aligned or positioned all day long can have an impact on how they feel. So for me, I feel like learning to sort of set a centered home position for your body can be very helpful for most people. So that would mean your pelvis centered over your heels, your rib cage relaxed down. Pelvic and ribcage alignment are really kind of integral to how your spine is, because many of us like to stand with our pelvis forward and with our ribcage lifted. I think because of shoes and chairs, and those movement patterns are going to tend to compress our spine. So for me, that was really instrumental in terms of changing how my back felt and worked. So definitely alignment. And then there's things like, how do you breathe, and what's your core functioning like? There's so much stuff. I actually just wrote a blog post on kind of troubleshooting back pain, because everybody's going to have a different pathway there. How do you sit all day long? I mean, there's some research that says sitting doesn't matter, which is really interesting. And I kind of believe that it's that nutrition thing again, is it's so complicated. So that for some people, sitting is going to be the thing that triggers their back pain, and other people, it'll be completely fine to sit however they like. And that's just because humans are so complex. I don't have any proof to back that up, but that's my personal sense, is that the reason you don't get clarity and why everybody has these, different reactions to similar movement patterns is just because we're so complex. And you may have back pain and I might have a pelvic floor issue, and my friend over there might have, I don't know, a knee replacement, all because of the same chair sitting impacts. So yeah, there's tons you can do. And novel movement. The biggest thing is novelty. So, the research does show that if you try moving in ways that you haven't tried before, that's usually one of the best ways to deal with pain in general and with your back specifically. So that might be difficult to do because you don't normally know how you move. So if you're like, oh, I want to go out and do something new for my back, that's one reason that doing back mobility work might work well for you, because if you have a sticky spot that never moves in your back and then you start moving that spot, that's new input for your brain. Brains love new input. That itself might be the reason that back mobility works. Who knows? It's definitely not clear. And then the final thing, I have so much to say about back pain, it turns out. The final thing that's often a good idea to think about is strengthening, and specifically isometrics to start with. So isometrics are a type of muscle contraction where you are not moving your joints. So this is concentric, this is eccentric. And if I'm pushing against my hand like this, that's isometric. That type of contraction is analgesic, it's pain killing. So if you're currently in pain and you can find someone who can coach you through a good isometric for your back, that might be an obvious first step to try to just kind of calm things down. So
Very interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, in one sentence, change your lifestyle. And you think it's normal.
Well, it worked for me. And, it's fascinating. As you know, like it's a giant wormhole. There's so much interesting stuff to explore. And I mean, I think you're never going to go wrong by spending like 15 minutes a day exploring different movement and changing how you move.
Definitely. Yes. And now the question. For all women over 40, is sneezing without peeing really possible?
Totally possible. 100% possible. You can do it. Oh, goodness. Yeah. Okay. So as you know, so pelvic floor issues are very widespread. I feel like, feet and pelvic floor are very, very related. You're going to see a lot of people with foot problems also have pelvic floor problems. It's actually really quite interesting how closely they're correlated. So working on pelvic floor stuff, the way I think about it is you can work on it top down, like how much is pushing on your pelvic floor, and you can work on it kind of bottom up, how long and strong is your pelvic floor and what are the influences that are affecting kind of the muscles of the pelvic floor. And just to be clear, the pelvic floor, it's a group of muscles that are at the bottom of your pelvis. That's what holds stuff inside you, including urine. So in the case of incontinence, it's because pelvic floor muscles are failing to hold urine in. So a sneeze tends to create pressure and those muscles are not doing their job. Now with incontinence, it's often a timing issue, not a strength issue. So sneeze pee can happen not because your pelvic floor isn't strong enough, but because it's not turning on at the right moment. So sometimes that can actually be fixed just by improving your brain-body connection with your pelvic floor. So exercises like gently rolling on a squishy ball, for example, or learning to breathe so you can feel your pelvic floor better are things that could potentially help you immediately. It is also possible that you need to consider changing the types of pressure that are overloading your pelvic floor. So that's where I think about breathing and core function and core patterning. So it certainly seems to be possible to, decrease pressure in your pelvic floor by opening up rib cage mobility and learning to breathe in a way that, uses your diaphragm more rather than pushing pressure with belly breath into your pelvic floor. It's very common, I think, for women, especially if we haven't done any kind of physical work, that when we are lifting things, we'll hold our breath. So we'll hold our breath to lift things, which is a huge amount of pressure. That's a Valsalva maneuver. That's a pressure maneuver for stability. And that can be very overloading for the pelvic floor. So learning to to load our pelvic floor better can help reduce the instances of failure. And then after that, it's going to be about strengthening, and strengthening the pelvic floor includes learning to lengthen it, less so learning to squeeze it for most people. Most people tend to have a shortened, tightened pelvic floor. And a lot of the lengthening is going to come from hip and inner thigh and hamstring and glute movement, because those are all, not only are they kind of attached to the pelvic area, but as you move in different ways, as you walk, for example, your pelvic floor travels through all kinds of lengthening positions. It needs to learn how to produce force as you're lengthened. So you can do simple sort of squatting type exercises to start learning to produce force and load the pelvic floor. So, it's very whole body. And the nice thing about pelvic floor work is that as you work on your pelvic floor, you're also going to get benefits for your feet and your knees and your hips and your spine and everything, because it is such kind of a center of movement symptoms, I guess you could call it.
That's very, very interesting. Yes. Women should think more about that. How movement is such a great remedy for a lot of things. And we're just forgetting about that. Because when we think about what being fit actually means, we often think about, strength, endurance, maybe, then flexibility sometimes, but we almost never think about balance. But the balance is so important. And I know that you also do some movement for improving balance, but what would you say to somebody that notices that his balance or her balance is kind of going in separate ways? What should they do?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the good thing is that working on your balance is going to help your pelvic floor, quite literally. So, I think the most important reason to work on balance is because as we walk, about 80% of your time walking is spent on a single leg. So the better your single leg balance, especially your dynamic balance, the less likely you're going to be when you walk to have a fall. And falling can be really catastrophic as we get older. So that means working on your feet, working on your hip strength, and then challenging your balance. So I would say, it's really helpful to do that shoe transition. And when I mentioned earlier doing exercises, you don't necessarily need to do a ton of foot exercises, but most people will benefit from some. And it can be as simple as rolling your feet on a ball every day or learning to lift your toes up one by one. They're not rocket science exercises. My Free Your Feet program is a really great place to start and will improve your balance. But the other reason you want to be in those more minimal or transitional shoes is because when your toes are being pinched together by your shoe, you're lacking, your base of support is smaller. The amount of space your body has to balance on is smaller. So you need to get into a fully wider toe so your feet can even do their thing. Hip strength is really important because it's your hips that stabilize your balance. That includes your inner thighs, your outer lateral hips and your inner thighs. And you can work on that in a bazillion ways. I'm sure, again, clamshell exercises and Pilates are going to be a great starting point for that. But just standing on one leg when you brush your teeth, also a really good way to work on your balance. Getting yourself a balance beam is awesome. And by balance beam, I would say start with a 2x4 and just learn to walk across your 2x4 on the ground. It's much harder than it sounds, and it's a great beginning. You can definitely move on from there with balance exercises. And you can also start to do fun stuff like grab yourself a tennis ball on a wall and stand on one leg and just throw your tennis ball on the wall, which is going to be so good for your hips, great for your feet. It's actually really fun. So yeah, you can just really be creative with your balance, but hugely helpful. And I wasn't joking when I said it'd be great for your feet and your pelvic floor as well, because all that hip work is amazing pelvic floor work. All that footwork is also amazing pelvic floor work. So there's the nice thing about what I teach is it's overwhelming at first when you first start it, but it also all leads towards the same point, which is, a body that's functioning better and feeling better along the way.
That all sounds fun. So I think that movement should be fun because everybody thinks about exercising and they're like, oh my God, I don't want to do that. But yeah, if you think about it as something fun, then it's helpful. It's better. So 100%. I think by now we all understand that our bodies need movement, but we tend to complicate things when it's not necessary. So Do you think we need any special equipment when we decide to move for our well-being?
That's a really good question. So it kind of depends on what you want to do. Like, I think that, you know, almost any movement that you do, exercise wise or in your regular life, you can be quite creative with it. But I would say that some of the heavy hitters that can be useful for people is, number one, I really think that learning to sit on the floor, spending some time sitting on the floor is really helpful for people. And you can do it while you're watching TV, like zero effort required. But most people's bodies don't work comfortably on the ground when they first start. So I would say some firm cushions that you can sit on to give yourself a little bit of bolstering. That would be really helpful. And a tool I like a lot is called a half round foam roller. So a foam roller that you literally slice in half, or you can buy them half size. I use those a lot for stretching and for helping to tip the pelvis in different directions. And they're very versatile. So I tend to recommend those. A rolling ball for your feet, because, you know, getting some self-massage in for your feet is really helpful, and you can use that on other parts of your body too, or you can throw it on a wall. And I think probably the one piece that's the most specialized that I really like is having a bar or rings to hang on as though you were like a monkey, which is the piece that I don't always talk about as much, but it's probably the most fun and the most missing for most people, is that arm overhead, building upper body strength, hanging from a monkey bar type of movement can be so helpful for our bodies, and it's so fun. But you can kind of do it in a doorway. There's ways to kind of work around it, but you will not regret getting yourself a pair of gym rings and learning how to use them.
So no more excuses. We can always start somewhere. We have everything we need.
We do.
And for the end of this conversation, please just tell our viewers where can they find you, and how do you help them?
Of course. So all of my things are called Petra Fisher Movement. So I'm Petra Fisher Movement on Instagram. My website is Petra Fisher Movement. My YouTube is Petra Fisher Movement. It's hopefully fairly easy to find that way. I do a lot of exactly what you are asking me about. So I have a free giveaway for helping your feet, which is a really great starting point. I also have a free giveaway for learning how to reposition your rib cage, which is kind of one of those all day, everyday movements that can be really helpful. And one that we created last year, which is super fun, is a 28-day start squatting challenge, which has helped thousands of people get better at squatting, which is super fun. And that's 28 days, but there's only one exercise to do a day. So that one's pretty accessible. So we give those all away on my website and on my social media. And I share a lot of tips on social media as well. So I think that's a pretty popular place to find out more information and get inspired, because a lot of it's just about kind of thinking about it, right? You know, just go for a little walk. It's not hard. You can do it.
Okay. But you do work with international clients, right? As long as they speak English.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of working with me, I almost always prefer people to take one of my online programs before I do one-on-one work with people. And that's just because I think it's more effective for most people. You know, I could teach you how to do a calf stretch, but you'd be paying me $130 an hour to do that. And you could take one of my online programs for that much money, practice doing a calf stretch, and then come to me and spend your money on me helping you troubleshoot something tricky. So anyone can work with me one-on-one. I do work by Zoom. But I really prefer it to be somebody who's coming from my existing student group, just because I think it's so much more effective that way. Okay. And then when I can teach in live in person, I do. So, you know, when we were in Australia, we taught a workshop in Perth, but because we travel all the time, that's hard to arrange. So if you're on my newsletter, you'll hear when those opportunities come up.
Okay, so I'll write your web address below this video, so everybody who wants will find you. And now we are at the end of our conversation. I'm very grateful that you took your time to talk to me. I think it was very interesting. Thank you for all your knowledge. And I hope we'll talk again someday.
Well, it's a real pleasure to meet you, Taya. And thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope I can see Slovenia. It looks absolutely beautiful from your picture.
Yeah,
so
it is.
Maybe
You're
someday.
welcome. Okay,
thank you. I'd love that.
Have a great day and Bye bye.
Bye bye. Take care.